It's been a year and a half since the pandemic hit and the economy crashed. So let's take a look at where things stand. The good news is the unemployment rate is way down. The bad news, a lot of places are still struggling to hire workers.
We desperately need substitute teachers. We're offering bonuses ranging from $500 to $3,300.
We all know the University of Oregon has one of the best track and field programs in the world. But according to a handful of former athletes, that program includes body shaming and putting women at risk for eating disorders.
And instead of realizing their dreams, it crashed on them.
And the bomb cyclone may be over, but does climate change mean we could see storms like this more often? We asked the experts. Here's the story.
Hey, good evening, everybody. Welcome to The Story. As always, we are looking for you to contact us. Let us know what you're thinking. So all the ways to do so are at the bottom of the screen. Email thestory@kgw.com. Use that hashtag, TheStoryKGW, on Twitter. Remember, your feedback truly does drive this show. So please let us know what you're thinking. With that, why waste time? Let's get right to our big story, which is all about the job market. And you might have noticed the economy has been acting, to use a technical term, a little weird. Okay, so don't get me wrong. It's certainly recovering from the crash that happened at the beginning of the pandemic. We all remember that. In fact, plenty of employers are hiring. But the problem is they still, heading into fall, heading into the holidays, they still can't find workers. Let's throw some numbers at you here. In September, Oregon's unemployment rate dropped to under 5%. 5%. That's great. It's actually historically great when you look at the graph showing the unemployment rates between 1992 and 2020. But even though the unemployment rate fell, industries are having trouble hiring people. In fact, for the first 8 months of the year, Oregon added an average of 10,000 jobs per month. But in September, the state as a whole lost jobs. And that doesn't mean people were fired or let go. It means industries didn't hire as many people as they expected. And the big industry that couldn't find people last month was the government, which lost 3,800 jobs. The employment department says this is mostly concentrated in K through 12 schools, which are struggling to hire. Normally, actually, in the fall, they would add a bunch of jobs for the upcoming school year, but that didn't happen. Hence why we're focusing on this now. We're now in the school year. This is still a problem. And in Beaverton, for example, they are scrambling to hire substitute teachers. And now the school district is offering some big incentives for those jobs. Christine Pitawanich looked into it for us.
In the Beaverton School District, there is a huge need for substitute teachers.
And my phone rings all the time. I'm Mayorine Kruger, and I was a teacher in the Beaverton School District until I retired 2 years ago, which was 37 years of teaching.
Now Kruger is back in the classroom.
The pandemic kind of spurred me to try to give back in some way.
Todd and Brenda Frimith, both retired teachers, are back substitute teaching too.
I think we could work every day if we wanted to. I mean, they are asking all the time.
We desperately need substitute teachers. We're offering bonuses ranging from $500 to $3,300, depending on the number of days worked, for all substitute teachers in all areas, all grade levels.
In addition, Beaverton School spokesperson Shelley Bailey Shaw says the district has raised the daily pay rate for substitute teachers from $195 to $230, an increase of almost 18%.
The money does talk, even for educators who are passionate about kids. It's nice to see that commitment on the district side.
We haven't done this in recent memory, and it just speaks to the huge need we have right now.
Here's what the Beaverton School District needs: 250 to 300 at-will substitutes who might be available a day here and there, about 20 who are on a full-year contract, and another 20 for virtual teaching. Bailey Shaw says there are two big factors when it comes to the substitute shortage. First, there was a lot of hiring over the summer, which depleted the substitute pool. And now there's also hesitancy among retired teachers to come back during the pandemic. But she says the district has safety protocols in place.
We only have about 1% of our students who are COVID positive or quarantined at this moment, and only 4 employees out of a pool of 4,600.
Both Kruger and the Frimiths returned before incentives were announced and say they feel safe. They hope others decide to substitute teach.
It's purposeful, meaningful work.
I mean, we were teachers because we love kids and we love education. And so we really want to be a part of, I guess, just kids being able to have a great year.
Bailey Shaw says the state commission in charge of licensing teachers relaxed some requirements earlier this month. Now you don't need a teaching license to apply as a substitute teacher, just a bachelor's degree. Christine Petawanich, KGW News.
Staying on this topic now in a different industry, how many of you have gone out to eat lately only to find the restaurant is closed? It's definitely happened to me. There is a huge staffing crisis also in the restaurant industry right now, just like in the education industry. And it's happening across the country. In fact, you might remember this back in July. The entire staff quit at a Burger King, of all places, in Nebraska, and they left this super subtle note for their bosses to come back to. We all quit. Sorry for the inconvenience. For obvious reasons, Twitter loved that photo. We assume their bosses did not. And the workers say they were tired, frankly, of short staffing, low pay, and dangerous work conditions. Now, here in Oregon, a similar story, minus the viral message board. The Oregon Restaurant and Lodging Association tells us that right now they need about 23,000 workers. 23,000. And that's just for the restaurants that they represent, which is not all of them. This is what we heard from restaurant owners, in fact, just last month.
We have a lot of people applying that don't show up to interviews.
When you get an application, you almost take the first thing you can get, because who knows when you're going to be able to get another person.
Okay, so we know what some of you are probably thinking. People just don't want to work right now. They would rather live on unemployment. The reality, experts say, is a lot more complicated than that. Restaurant workers in particular put up with a lot, especially over the last 2 years, with restaurants closing and then opening and then closing again and then opening again. You know what I'm saying? We all live through it, especially in Oregon, and we've seen countless times when customers take out their anger about mask or vaccine mandates on restaurant staff. Case in point, this article from Eater PDX just last month. It does a really good job of detailing what workers in restaurants are going through here in the Portland area. And it actually comes with a content warning, because some restaurants workers have faced some really brutal attacks that are just tough to read about. Kind of just to sum one of them up, basically, employees at a bakery in Northeast Portland say they now have to keep a can of bear mace behind the counter. On top of all of that, it's not like working in a restaurant was easy before the pandemic. You've got a schedule that is usually inconsistent. You don't always know how much you're going to make because you rely a lot on tips. And if you have kids, childcare is a major barrier because you don't, frankly, work 9 to 5 most days. So Jason Brandt with the Oregon Restaurant and Lodging Association tells us that last one, the childcare issue, is one of the major issues that they're trying to work out right now.
We clearly have some childcare issues across the state. It doesn't really matter what county you're in. We have an ongoing set of challenges connecting our employers with resources that are available to their employees to set up childcare for any dependents. But the reality is, I think we need to start looking at more creative solutions. Maybe there's ways to open up lodging spaces to create kind of co-op childcare facilities where we don't have enough supply. But I think all solutions, brainstorming ideas need to be on the table because it's a significant issue that needs everyone to take their seat and kind of roll up their sleeves and figure this out.
So Brandt, in case you're wondering, he at least says that restaurant wages and benefits are high right now, and a lot of places are offering big bonuses and incentives to new workers, but it's going to be a while, he says, before we see the restaurant industry recover. All right, switching gears, the Oregonian has a story that we think is absolutely worth your time. It's about the University of Oregon's track and field program. 6 female athletes who recently left that program say they were body shamed and put at risk for eating disorders. They accuse the school's head track coach of monitoring their body fat percentages and pressuring them to lose weight. So Catherine Cook spoke with Ken Go, the sports writer who broke that story.
I didn't really seek this out. I mean, I was retired, right? And I didn't plan to spend 2 months working on a story.
Sports writer Ken Go says the story he couldn't ignore started last summer with emails he got from 6 female track and field athletes. All of them competed at the University of Oregon, and all of them left, 5 with eligibility remaining.
They had some concerns about what Coach Johnson was doing with the program.
Robert Johnson, head track and field and cross country coach at Oregon since 2012. He has multiple national titles under his belt. But when it comes to athletes' health, Go reported in the Oregonian, the women felt devalued. They also felt at risk for eating disorders. They blamed the program's data-driven approach to their weight and body fat percentages. 3 times a year, all track athletes are required to undergo a DEXA scan. It uses X-ray technology to measure bone density and body fat percentage. Athletes who didn't meet certain standards were assigned extra cardio workouts. Some say they were told they couldn't travel to away meets if they didn't lower their body fat percentage. Athletes told Go it led to eating disorders, emotional distress, body dysmorphia, and nightmares.
And instead of realizing their dreams, it crashed on them. And they're in their room at night counting calories or binging or just feeling bad about themselves because they're not at a certain body fat percentage. Well, then you start to feel like, well, they need a voice, right?
Go says all 6 athletes asked to remain anonymous. He says they're scared of being ostracized by longtime Oregon sponsor Nike or being banned from the world's biggest track meets, most hosted by the University of Oregon.
And so for these women to come forward, even anonymously, and speak out in this situation, I think is remarkable because they're taking a risk.
It's a risk many are applauding at a critical time in the sport. This month, former Nike distance runner Mary Kane filed a $20 million lawsuit against Nike and former coach and Oregon star Alberto Salazar. She's claiming emotional abuse, including fat shaming that led to an eating disorder. Kane's attorney shared her thoughts on what she believes is an industry-wide problem.
These athletes who have been abused and neglected have the strongest drive and commitment to themselves that I've ever seen, and then it gets exploited.
In response to Go's article, a university spokesperson tells KGW the health and safety of our student athletes is always our top priority, and there are many sports performance professionals on our staff that work closely in supporting student athletes, including our medical team, athletic trainers, sports scientists, and nutritionists. Go says he's hearing from athletes with similar stories from multiple schools. He hopes his work will help make a difference, starting at Oregon.
I don't necessarily think that Robert Johnson's a bad person. I think he's doing the best he can do. He's paid to win meets and produce national champions. I think he probably should approach this a little differently in the future, and hopefully I think he will.
Catherine Cook, KGW News.
Fire season is officially over in Oregon. But does that mean all the wildfires that burned this summer are officially out? Well, it's complicated.
So we won't see that fire called out until at least next spring, possibly even the year after.
When the story continues.
A lot of questions and comments about the big story about the labor industry shortage, the substitute teachers, and the restaurant industry. Great commentary from you guys. Keep sending them in. Email thestory@kgw.com or use that hashtag, #TheStoryKGW on Twitter. In fact, let's get to a viewer question right now. James wrote, lately, we've had record-breaking wildfires that makes all the news for a while, but then we get a little rain and you hear nothing more about it. And then he added, we've had quite a bit of rain lately. So are they all out now or at least contained? James, great question. So first things first, check out this tweet. I think you'll like this. It's from the Bureau of Land Management. They sent it out on Friday. The big message: fire season in the Pacific Northwest is officially over. More specifically, they wrote, there are 0 active large fires in Oregon and Washington. 0 active large fires. I was curious about that verbiage, so I reached out to BLM's State Fire Management Officer, Jeff Fedrizzi, for some context.
In your world, what does active large fires mean? Why is it written that way?
Yeah, so active large fires is probably, honestly, even from a historical standpoint, we probably need to update a little bit, because large fire is actually a technical term that there's a scale. So 100 acres in timberland or greater, or 300 acres in range and brushland or greater is considered a large fire.
So we'll leave those numbers up. Again, in technical firefighter terms, what constitutes a large fire depends on the type of land burning: 100 acres of timber or more, or 300 acres of range or brush or more. That's large. Patrizi added active basically means what it sounds like. The fire would be actively moving or growing. So again, no large active fires in Oregon or Washington. Now, that being said, that does not mean that all the fires are out. Out is actually also a technical term. So to explain, let's talk about the bootleg fire, the biggest one, frankly, of the fire season. This is file video from when bootleg was at its peak at 413,000 acres. As of today, that fire is 100% controlled. I asked Fadrizi what that means.
Yeah, so controlled means we have stopped the forward momentum, side momentum of the fire in a perimeter. Now, there are times where that can pop out, but 99% of the time when it's controlled, it's controlled. There are no active acres, that are actively burning. You'll see maybe some drift smoke, some smoke that will continually pop up, burning a big, what we call heavy fuel, large log. It'll just burn until it burns itself out, and then it may pop up 100 yards down or a mile off, whatever. So the public absolutely will see that throughout this fall. Possibly even in the winter.
So in other words, again, you'll see smoldering within bootleg's perimeter, but no active flames in that perimeter anymore. In fact, Fadrizi added, though, in bootleg's case, he does not think officials will be able to label that fire as officially out until at least spring. Now, while these big rainstorms are good when it comes to putting fires out, they can also cause some big problems in the areas that have burned, like landslides and debris flows. And that's what happened this week in Northern California when the bomb cyclone hit. Keely Chalmers spoke with a researcher at Portland State University who is studying that exact threat right here in the Pacific Northwest.
Not long after the bomb cyclone spun its heavy rains into Northern California, the earth started giving way. Destructive landslides and debris flows swept down hillsides that had been recently burned by wildfires. We saw something similar happen in Oregon just this past January. Heavy rains brought in by an atmospheric river caused this deadly slide near Dodson that swept away a woman driving in her car. It was the same area that had been severely burned in the Eagle Creek fire 3 years prior.
And so our project is looking at a landslide and debris flows that happened in the Eagle Creek burn.
It was an event Portland State University researcher Dr. Andrew Martin is now studying.
We are actually looking at how extreme precipitation impacts two phenomena: landslides and debris flows.
Specifically in areas burned by wildfires. Martin and his research team are working alongside the U.S. Geological Survey to better understand how these events will intensify as the climate changes.
Two things that we think might increase with climate change in the future, and one is more extreme precipitation, and the other is potentially more fires.
More rain and more fires will likely mean more slides. Martin and his team want to find out more about what factors trigger those slides and when and where. They know that fire wipes out plants and vegetation that helps stabilize hillsides, but they also learned that burned forests tend to absorb less water. When a heavy rain comes into those areas, the impact can be disastrous.
Because the rain that hits the burned area, the burned forest, it can't soak into the ground, and it instead pools and runs down the surface, and it carries all of the mud and fallen trees and the other debris with it.
The researchers have put instruments in previously burned areas of the gorge. Those instruments will track rain amounts and ground movement and give the researchers a look underground at what is happening when the land starts to slide.
Then we can start to say, well, this type of fire is really at risk of landslides, and maybe this other type of fire or this other type of storm system that produces rain may not be so much.
Keely Chalmers, KGW News.
All right, I want you to take a look now at Oregon's new congressional map. This is it. Check this out. Would you say that this is fair or unfair in terms of partisanship? Well, a national group that grades these maps just gave it a big, fat F. We'll explain when the story continues. Oregon politics. Can you feel the blood pressure rising already? I can. Remember last month when state lawmakers were fighting over how to draw Oregon's new congressional districts? Well, finally they agreed, or at least rather Republicans agreed not to walk out over the Democrats' plan, because that's as good as we can get in Oregon at this point. Scott certainly remembers. He emailed us this suggestion. Take people out of it, he said. Have a computer randomly select a starting point, aka some corner of the state, have a randomly selected boundary shape, diagonal, square, round, then have it grow until the correct number of people are in the district. He is so fed up with Oregon politicians, he would rather have a computer do a basic paint word drawing to make these districts. Well, apparently we have the next best thing. The Princeton Gerrymandering Project just analyzed Oregon's new map. Yes, with a computer. And they gave it an F grade in terms of partisan fairness.
Well, it's a little complicated. So Oregon got an F because of the combination of its map not being fair to Republicans in the state of Oregon, and the fact that there weren't enough competitive districts. And the way that we determined that was we have a computer program that generates 1 million maps using an algorithm, and it does so by taking into consideration Oregon's political geography. So it thinks about where folks are located, takes into consideration the various criteria that map drawers have to comply with when they're drawing the lines, and then says, what would the expected partisan outcomes of this 1 million maps be? And it uses a bar chart to do that. So an A grade from our algorithm would actually have created a 4-2 delegation, so not dramatically different from the map that was drawn. And it still would have given more congressional seats to the Democratic Party, but it just says that really there should have been probably one more Republican-leaning seat.
And apparently that's enough to get you an F. And by the way, Oregon's not the only state that they're grading. Every state has to redraw their district lines after the census. So we asked how they've rated other maps compared to Oregon's.
So Oregon's map is, I'll be honest, is probably basically on par with the maps that we're seeing that state legislatures are drawing. So where the state legislators are the ones that get to ultimately draw congressional maps, we are seeing that they are often partisan gerrymanders. We've been giving out a lot of Fs. So Texas, for example, has finalized their grade. We gave them an F. Illinois is in the process of finishing up their process, and we gave them an F as well. But that compares quite sharply to those states where there were some sort of citizens commission drawing the maps. So for example, in Colorado, where they passed a ballot initiative that put the map drawing process into the hands of citizens, we actually give those maps an A. So it does sort of suggest that when you take out the political actors from the process, that you can get fairer maps.
As someone who is from Illinois and lives in Oregon, boy, do I have egg on my face. Well, speaking of that, a group called People Not Politicians is trying to get an initiative on Oregon's 2022 ballot to create an independent redistricting commission. That means lawmakers would frankly not be involved anymore. I can hear Scott cheering from here. Right now, they are working to gather signatures. It is worth noting, though, the same group tried and failed to get this on the ballot in 2020. All right, meantime, there is a few legal challenges to Oregon's new maps. Oregon's former Republican Secretary of State Bev Clarno is suing over the congressional district map, saying it is unconstitutionally gerrymandered to favor Democrats. So she probably agrees with the F. There are also a couple of lawsuits over the state's new legislative districts, so state politics. Interestingly, one of them argues that Democrats drew a House district, so one of their own members would lose his seat. Yeah. Democrat State Representative Marty Wildey represents part of Southeast Eugene, but the new map makes his district a lot more rural and more likely to be won by a Republican. So now Wildey isn't part of this lawsuit, but he says he supports it. He claims he's being punished for planning to challenge Democratic Senator Floyd Prozansky in a primary for his seat. The webs get more complicated. All right, keep sending in your questions and your comments to thestory@kgw.com. Find us on social media. We're going to finish the show right after this. Hey, before we go, let's talk Hey Help tonight. This week, we are asking you to consider donating to Urban Gleaners. They distribute thousands of pounds of free food directly to kids and their families year-round. And they also deliver food to local schools. So to donate, just hold your phone's camera up to this QR code. It'll take you to a donation page. Or you can go to kgw.com/HeyHope. And while you're holding your phone, and why are we kidding ourselves? You've had it the entire time. Follow us on Twitter at @TheStoryKGW or email thestory@kgw.com. That about does it for the end of the show. Let's bring in Ashley Korslund now, filling in for Laurel Porter. Hey, Ashley.
Yeah, hey, thanks, Maggie. Tonight we're talking about all things vaccines, where you can get a booster shot, and how some high school kids are fighting for a vaccine mandate in their district. The news at 6:30 starts now.